In a quiet village surrounded by fields of wheat and olive trees, there lived two friends whose names were known together as if they were one. Arman and Zayan had grown up side by side. Their homes stood only a lane apart, and their laughter had once been the music of the street. They were not just companions in play, but in thought and in heart. When one spoke, the other listened with the kind of attention that is rare even among family. Their bond was woven out of countless conversations, late-night talks beneath the stars, long walks by the river where they planned their futures, and whispered secrets in moments of doubt. Words were the bridge between them, a bridge that seemed unbreakable. Through words they healed each other's wounds, celebrated victories, and lightened burdens that might have been too heavy for one soul alone. In times of sorrow, Zayan's voice could calm Arman's storms, and in moments of fear, Arman's words gave Zayan courage. Theirs was not a friendship of convenience, but of depth, rooted in the simple act of speaking and listening. The villagers often smiled when they saw them together. "Here come the two brothers of heart," the elders would say. Though not related by blood, they were bound by something stronger, the trust that grows only when honesty flows freely. People envied them, for in a world where misunderstandings often build walls, these two had only ever built bridges. But the strength of a bridge lies not only in its stones, but in its maintenance. Even the most carefully laid foundation can crack if it is not cared for. What they did not realize was that the very gift that had held them together, the sharing of words, was also the one that, when withheld, could undo everything they had built. Arman, thoughtful and passionate, often needed to speak his heart to feel understood. Zayan, steady and calm, believed that silence kept pain. This difference had always balanced their friendship. One poured out words, the other absorbed them with patience. Yet balance is delicate, and a single shift can turn harmony into discord. One evening, under the fading light of the setting sun, that shift began. Arman came to Zayan with a heart heavy from a quarrel he had endured with others. He expected comfort, expected words of reassurance that would steady his spirit, as they always had. But Zayan, unsure of what to say, chose silence instead. He thought his quiet presence was enough, that stillness would soothe more than speech. Arman left that evening with questions in his chest. For the first time in years, words had failed to pass between them. The silence was small, almost invisible, like a single thread loosened from a tightly woven cloth. Yet even a single thread, once pulled, can unravel the whole garment if ignored. They did not know it then, but the bond they believed unbreakable had felt its very first fracture, not from anger, not from betrayal, but from the weight of silence. The evening after Arman left Zayan's side in quiet disappointment, the village air felt heavier. To those who looked from outside, nothing had changed. The two friends still crossed paths, still exchanged polite greetings, still walked the same lanes they always had. Yet something invisible lingered between them, a gap made not of distance, but of words unsaid. Arman replayed that moment in his mind again and again. He had sat before Zayan, his heart like a storm seeking shelter. He had needed to hear something, anything, that reminded him their bond was still alive, that Zayan's voice could steady him as before. But all he had received was silence. The silence gnawed at him more than anger would have. Anger, at least, is loud. It acknowledges presence. Silence, however, felt like absence, as though his pain did not matter. Zayan, on the other hand, believed he had done the right thing. He told himself, sometimes words only make wounds deeper. Better to stay quiet than to say the wrong thing. He thought his silent presence had been enough of a comfort. In his mind, Arman would understand his intent. Yet intent, when hidden, often loses its meaning. What matters is not only what we feel, but what we express. Days stretched on, and the small thread of silence began to pull at the fabric of their closeness. Arman spoke less when they met. The stories he once eagerly shared now stayed locked within him. Zayan noticed, but chose not to press, thinking time would mend the space between them. Time, however, does not heal what is unacknowledged. Instead, it deepens the wound. One afternoon, they worked together repairing a fence near the orchard. It should have been like old times, hands busy, hearts open, words flowing with the rhythm of labor, but the air was thick with quiet. Birds sang from the branches, the wind rustled through the leaves, yet between the two of them lay only stillness. Arman wanted to ask, "Why did you not speak that day?" But pride held him back. Zayan wanted to say, "I was afraid of hurting you with the wrong words," yet fear sealed his lips, and so silence spoke louder than either of them. The villagers began to notice. Where once there had been laughter echoing from the fields, now there was only stillness. "Perhaps they've grown older," some said. "Perhaps friendship fades with time." But those who looked more closely could see it was not time that had dimmed their bond. It was something simpler, yet sharper. The absence of words when they were most needed. It is often said that silence is golden, but gold can be heavy if carried too long. A small silence, if left unattended, begins to weigh like a stone in the chest. For Arman, each day without reassurance felt like betrayal. For Zayan, each day without explanation felt like safety. Neither realized that their silence, though chosen for different reasons, was building the same wall. Thus, the first silence was born, not as a gentle pause, but as the seed of distance. And seeds, whether of kindness or neglect, always grow. Weeks slipped into months. The once vibrant friendship of Arman and Zayan had become like a house with shuttered windows, standing but dark within. They still met in the village square, still exchanged small courtesies, but the bridge of words that once connected their hearts now carried cracks. Arman noticed how easy it was for Zayan to speak with others. He laughed freely with neighbors, gave advice to younger men, and greeted elders with warmth. Yet when it came to Arman, his words were careful, short, or sometimes absent. Each silence felt like a reminder. He no longer trusts me with his voice. The thought stung deeper than any insult could have. Zayan, meanwhile, struggled with his own guilt. He felt the tension between them, but the more he noticed it, the more uncertain he became about how to break it. Every day he thought, "I should explain, I should speak," but each time the moment came, his tongue grew heavy. He feared that if he spoke too late, his words would sound hollow. So he chose to stay quiet, hoping his presence was enough. But presence without expression is often mistaken for indifference. The village festivals passed. Once they would have stood together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing stories by the fire. Now they stood apart, each surrounded by different groups, their eyes meeting only briefly before turning away. To outsiders, it seemed a natural drifting, but to the two of them, it was a painful silence that neither dared to confront. Friendship is like a garden. Neglect does not destroy it overnight, but each day without care allows weeds to grow. Between Arman and Zayan, weeds of doubt began to spread. Arman doubted Zayan's care. Zayan doubted Arman's patience. Both longed for the garden to bloom again, but neither bent down to clear the weeds. One evening, Arman sat by the river where they once dreamed of the future. He watched the current, and carrying leaves downstream and whispered to himself, "Words are like these waters. If they stop flowing, everything turns stagnant." He wondered if their friendship was now doomed to stagnation, trapped by silence. At the same time, Zayan sat in his courtyard, staring at the stars. He remembered nights when they spoke of endless possibilities, of journeys they would take together. The stars were the same, but the silence between them made the memories feel like they belonged to another life. He told himself, "I will speak tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. Thus, the bridge of words, once strong enough to bear their heaviest burdens, began to crumble. Not from storms of anger, not from betrayal, but from the slow, quiet erosion of silence. And every day that passed without words, the cracks deepened, unseen but undeniable. Silence has a way of stretching itself into every corner of life. What began as a pause, small and almost invisible, soon became a shadow that followed Arman and Zayan everywhere. When they sat together, silence sat with them. When they walked the familiar roads, it walked too. It was there in the pauses between sentences, in the unsent letters of the heart, in the words rehearsed but never spoken. Silence grew heavier, and each carried it differently. Arman carried it like a wound. He remembered the times when Zayan's words had been his anchor, the nights he had poured his heart out and been met with comfort, the mornings when encouragement had set his steps forward. Now he felt abandoned, as if the very person who once steadied him had turned away. To Arman, Zayan's silence was not caution, but betrayal. Zayan carried silence like a shield. He told himself that speaking now would only dig the wound deeper. He believed that time, patience, and unspoken understanding would heal what words could not. Yet he did not see that his shield was slowly becoming a wall, one that Arman could no longer climb. Their meetings grew fewer. Even when they stood in the same place, they seemed worlds apart. Arman's eyes, once so quick to shine with trust, now carried a dullness. Zayan noticed, but convinced himself that silence was still the safer path. He told himself, better to remain quiet than to say what may be regretted. One afternoon, a storm swept across the village. The sky cracked with thunder, rain fell in heavy sheets, and people ran for shelter. Arman and Zayan both found themselves beneath the same awning, only a step apart. The storm outside raged, but the storm within them was quieter, colder, and far more destructive. Arman wanted to speak, to break the silence with a simple question. Why did you turn away from me when I needed you? Zayan wanted to answer before the question was asked. I was afraid. I didn't want to fail you. But neither voice broke the stillness. They stood side by side, closer than anyone else, yet as distant as strangers. The villagers began to whisper. The two brothers of heart no longer share their hearts, they said. It is a pity. Silence has stolen their laughter. Yet the truth was deeper than gossip could reach. Silence had not stolen their laughter. It had silenced their very souls. As the storm passed, so did the moment. The sun returned, shining on wet roads and gleaming rooftops, but the silence remained. Opportunities like storms come and go, leaving behind either renewal or ruin. For Arman and Zayan, every missed chance to speak added weight to the burden they both carried. Silence, once chosen for peace, had become the very thing destroying it. Life has a cruel way of offering second chances that look almost identical to the first. For Arman and Zayan, opportunities to speak arose often, but each was wasted, swallowed by hesitation. One morning, as they worked in the fields, Arman stumbled and injured his hand. Zayan rushed to help, holding him steady as he wrapped a cloth around the wound. In that moment, the closeness they had once known flickered again. Zayan could have spoken then, could have said, I miss the days when nothing stood between us. Arman could have said, Your silence hurt me more than any enemy ever could. Yet both let the moment slip, covering discomfort with forced smiles and shallow words about harvests and weather. At the village well, they often found themselves waiting together, buckets in hand. The walk back from the well could have been a chance to heal, but it was filled instead with small talk. Their words skimmed the surface of life, but never touched the depths where truth waited. Zayan told himself, Tomorrow I will speak. But tomorrow always brought new excuses. Arman told himself, if he cared, he would speak first. And so silence fed on pride, pride fed on silence, until both were too entangled to separate. The saddest part of silence is not its presence, but the way it erases laughter. The fields no longer echoed with their joy. The riverside no longer carried their plans. Where once the village had seen two men walking as one, now they saw two men walking alone. One evening, a festival was held in the square. Lanterns glowed, drums beat, and children danced. Arman and Zayan stood across the crowd from one another. Their eyes met for a moment. Both hearts leapt, remembering festivals past when they had stood together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing food, stories, and dreams. For a breath, they nearly moved toward each other. Yet the silence held them back, like chai, ends invisible but unbreakable. They turned away, and the moment was lost. Missed chances pile up like stones in a river. One stone does not stop the flow, but enough stones can block even the strongest current. Their friendship was once a river, flowing with ease and strength. Now, stone by stone, silence was damming its course. Arman began to withdraw, not out of anger, but from exhaustion. Carrying silence is heavy work. Zayan, though he longed to reach out, convinced himself he still had time. But time, indifferent and merciless, does not pause for hesitation. In every life, there are moments when words must be spoken, even if imperfect. To leave them unsaid is to let silence make the choice for us. And silence, once it rules, rarely shows mercy. It was early morning when the village woke to find Arman gone. His house stood with doors closed, windows shuttered, and the hearth cold. No farewell had been given, no letter left behind. Only absence remained, heavy and undeniable. The news spread quickly. "Arman has left," the villagers whispered. Some said he had gone to seek work in distant lands. Others believed he had simply grown weary of the life he knew, but Zayan knew better. He did not need explanations. He felt the truth in his chest. Arman had left not because of the world, but because of the silence that had grown between them. Zayan stood at the empty doorstep, staring at the door that would no longer open to his knock. He remembered the countless times he had entered this home without invitation, greeted with laughter and trust. Now the silence that had once been unspoken stretched into something permanent: absence. He wanted to cry out, to call his friend's name into the streets, to run after him and speak the words he had buried for too long. But his tongue, so quick in other matters, had been too slow when it mattered most. Regret pressed on him like a weight too heavy to bear. Days passed, then weeks, and still Arman did not return. Zayan went about his life, but the emptiness followed him. He walked past the river, remembering nights of conversation. He passed the orchard, remembering laughter. Every place they had shared became a reminder of what silence had stolen. One evening, sitting alone under the stars, Zayan finally spoke the words aloud, though no one was there to hear. "I was afraid. I should have told you I cared. I should have spoken when you needed me." His voice broke the night, but it was too late. Words unspoken at the right time rarely carry weight when spoken to the wind. Silence had won, not because it was powerful, but because it had been allowed to grow unchecked. Arman. His departure was not sudden. It was the final step in a journey that began the first day words were withheld. The weight of silence had broken what storms, distance, and hardship never could. Time moved on, as it always does. Seasons turned, children grew, and the village changed. Yet for Zayan, one truth remained. Silence had cost him his dearest friend. He often wondered if Arman thought of him in the distant land where he now lived. Perhaps Arman had built a new life, surrounded by people who spoke freely, who did not mistake silence for care. Or perhaps, like Zayan, he sometimes sat by a window at night, remembering the bond they once shared. Whatever the truth, distance made no difference. The lesson had already been carved into both their lives. Silence can be a gift. In moments of anger, it prevents harm. In moments of grief, it offers space. But silence, when chosen at the wrong time, is not peace. It is abandonment. Words spoken harshly may bruise, but words withheld when needed most can wound beyond repair. Zayan became a quieter man in the village, though not because of pride. It was reflection that silenced him now. He spoke carefully, with awareness that every word carried weight. Yet he also knew the greater danger, the words left unsaid. When younger men came to him for advice, he told them, "Do not fear to speak your truth, even if imperfect. A flawed word is lighter than the burden of silence." When he saw friends quarreling, he urged them, better to speak and stumble than to hold silence and regret. His own story had become his teaching, his loss a warning to others. The villagers came to respect his wisdom, but Zayan never boasted of where it came from. Only in his heart did he know his greatest teacher had been silence, and the cost of that lesson had been the loss of Arman. And so the story of the two friends became a quiet legend in the village. Parents told their children, elders told the young. Silence is powerful, but so are words. Know when to hold them back, and know when to let them flow. Do not wait until it is too late. Yapiptu. For the truth is simple and eternal. The weight of silence, left unchecked, is often heavier than the sharpest word spoken in haste. Words can wound, but they can also heal. Silence can comfort, but it can also destroy. Wisdom lies not in avoiding words, but in knowing when they must be spoken. Thus the tale of Arman and Zayan reminds us all. Speak while the heart is open, while the bridge is still standing, while the chance still exists. For once, silence builds its wall too high. No word, however sincere, can climb over.